The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March, and I knew before opening it that something was wrong because the HOA never sent good news. I stood there on the porch of my cabin in the Colorado Rockies, 5 miles outside the planned community of Riverside Estates, and tore open the envelope with my grandfather's name still visible on the return address label they had crossed out. Notice of Property Lien, the header read in bold letters. My stomach dropped as I scanned the document. According to this legal nightmare signed by one Brenda Patterson, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association, I owed $12,000 in back dues, special assessments, and late fees. They had placed a lien on my property effective immediately. I read it 3 times, certain there had to be some mistake. My cabin was not part of Riverside Estates. My grandfather, Marcus Dalton Sr., had built this place in 1978, decades before some developer bought up the valley land downstream and created their little kingdom of cookie-cutter houses and manicured lawns. I had inherited the property 2 years ago when Grandpa passed, and I had been living here ever since, working remotely as a software engineer and enjoying the peace that only mountain solitude could provide. The letter claimed that a recent survey had determined my property fell within the boundaries of their community, and that I was therefore subject to all HOA rules, regulations, and fees retroactive to the date of the survey 6 months ago. I had received no notice of any survey. I had received no welcome packet, no rulebook, no nothing. Just this letter informing me I was in debt and my property was now encumbered. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the letter. A chirpy voice answered on the 3rd ring. Riverside Estates HOA, this is Tammy speaking. How can I help you today? This is Marcus Dalton. I just received a lien notice that makes absolutely no sense. My property is not part of your HOA. Oh, Mr. Dalton. Yes, we have been trying to reach you. Let me transfer you to Mrs. Patterson. Before I could respond, elevator music filled my ear. I paced the porch, looking down at the valley where Riverside Estates sprawled across what used to be open meadow. The development had grown over the past 5 years, eating up more and more land. 200 homes now, maybe more. All of them connected to the county water system, or so I had thought. This is Brenda Patterson. The voice was sharp, clipped, and carried the unmistakable tone of someone who believed herself to be very important. Mrs. Patterson, I am Marcus Dalton. I received your lien notice, and there has been a serious mistake. My cabin is not part of Riverside Estates. It never has been. Mr. Dalton, I understand this must come as a surprise, but the survey does not lie. Your property is within our boundaries, which means you are subject to our governing documents. We have been more than patient, but you have failed to respond to multiple attempts at contact. I never received any attempts at contact except this lien notice. Well, that is unfortunate, but it does not change your obligations. The lien will remain in place until you pay the outstanding balance in full. Additionally, we need you to come into compliance with several violations that were noted during our inspection. My jaw clenched. What inspection? You cannot just walk onto my property. Mr. Dalton, if you are part of the HOA, we absolutely can. It is in the CC and Articus that you agreed to when you purchased the property. I inherited this property from my grandfather, and he built it before your HOA even existed. That is not what our records show. Now, regarding the violations, you have unapproved exterior paint colors, no visible house numbers, multiple vehicles that appear inoperable, and your landscaping is not in compliance with our standards. You have 30 days to remedy these issues or face additional fines. I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. Mrs. Patterson, with all due respect, you need to check your survey again. This is not your jurisdiction. I suggest you review the documentation we sent and consult with an attorney if you wish to dispute this matter. The lien is valid, and we will proceed with foreclosure proceedings if necessary. Good day, Mr. Dalton. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, fury building in my chest. Foreclosure. On my grandfather's cabin. Over some fraudulent claim that I was part of their ridiculous HOA, I went inside and pulled out the file cabinet where I kept all the property documents. The deed was clear. The property lines were clear. My land consisted of 40 acres starting at the ridgeline and running down to Cascade Creek, which formed the northern boundary. Riverside Estates was south of the creek, separated by a good quarter-mile of county land that acted as a buffer zone. But then something else caught my eye as I rifled through the old papers. A leather folder I had seen before but never really examined. I opened it and found myself looking at water rights documentation dating back to 1892. My great-great-grandfather had homesteaded this land, and as part of that claim, he had secured the water rights to Cascade Creek and 2 natural springs that fed it. I read through the documents with growing interest. The water rights were senior rights, among the oldest in the county. They gave the holder complete control over the water sources. I pulled out my laptop and started researching Colorado water law, something I had never had reason to care about before. 3 hours later, I leaned back in my chair with a slow smile spreading across my face. In Colorado, water rights were property, separate from land ownership. They could be bought, sold, or transferred, but they did not just disappear. My family had maintained these rights for over a century, paying the minimal annual fees and filing the required documentation. The rights were solid, legal, and apparently very relevant, because as I pulled up the county records online, I discovered something fascinating. Riverside Estates had never established their own water rights. When the developer built the community, they had connected to what they thought was the county water system. But the county system in this area was fed entirely by Cascade Creek and the springs on my property. The same water sources I controlled. The development had been built on the assumption that water was available. No one had bothered to check who actually owned the rights to that water. They had just assumed it was public. But it was not. It was mine. Every drop that flowed down to their community came from sources I controlled. I printed out copies of everything and drove into town to visit my attorney, James Richardson, who had handled the property transfer when Grandpa died. His office was in Cedar Ridge, the small mountain town that served as the county seat. James was in his 60s, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent a lifetime in the mountains. He listened to my story without interrupting, reviewing the documents I had brought. "Marcus, this is quite a mess," he said finally. "The good news is that their survey is complete garbage. Your property is absolutely not part of Riverside Estates. The bad news is that they filed the lien anyway, which means you are going to have to go through legal proceedings to get it removed. How long will that take? Months, probably. Maybe a year if they fight it. These HOA cases can drag on forever." I felt my hopes sinking, but then James picked up the water rights documentation and his expression changed. Now this, on the other hand, is very interesting. If I am reading this correctly, you own the senior water rights to the sources that feed Riverside Estates. That is what it looks like to me. I spent the morning researching it. James was quiet for a long moment, reading through the papers carefully. Then he looked up at me with something that might have been admiration. "Marcus, do you understand what this means? You could shut off their water tomorrow if you wanted to, legally. These are senior rights, properly maintained, and they predate everything down there by more than a century. I know, but I am not trying to hurt anyone. I just want them to remove this fraudulent lien and leave me alone. Oh, I understand completely, but this gives you leverage, significant leverage. How about I make a call to the HOA's attorney and explain the situation? Sometimes these things can be resolved quickly when both parties understand the stakes. I agreed, and James said he would reach out that afternoon. I drove back up the mountain feeling slightly better. At least I had options. At least I was not powerless against their bureaucratic nonsense. 2 days passed before James called me back. I was outside splitting firewood when my phone rang. "Marcus, we need to talk. Can you come by the office?" An hour later, I was sitting across from him again, and his expression was grim. I spoke with their attorney, a guy named Richard Morrison out of Denver. I explained the situation with the property boundaries and the water rights. I was very clear that you have the legal authority to restrict their water access if this matter is not resolved amicably. And he laughed at me. He said the water rights were irrelevant because of public access laws and that the lien would stand. He said if you tried to interfere with their water supply, they would sue you into oblivion. Then he hung up. I felt the anger returning. They cannot be serious. I am afraid they are. Mrs. Patterson apparently has a reputation. She runs that HOA like a personal fiefdom. They have been sued multiple times by homeowners and they always fight tooth and nail. She does not back down. Then neither will I. What are my options? James pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Option 1. We file to have the lien removed. That is the slow route, and there is no guarantee they will not just harass you with other claims in the meantime. Option 2. You actually exercise your water rights. You notify the county and the HOA that you are restricting water flow from your property. That would get their attention very quickly. Would that be legal? Absolutely. Your water rights are crystal clear. You would need to follow proper notification procedures. But yes, you could legally shut off the water to Riverside Estates. They would have to find another source, which in this area would be extremely difficult and expensive, or they would have to negotiate with you for access. I thought about it. 200 families living down there. Kids, elderly people, regular folks who had nothing to do with Brenda Patterson's power games. Could I really cut off their water? I do not want to hurt innocent people, I said. I understand. But think of it this way. You would not be doing this to be cruel. You would be doing it to protect your property rights. They came after you first. They put a lien on your home based on false claims. Sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to show them you are not powerless. I left the office without making a decision. I spent the weekend hiking the property, thinking. My grandfather had loved this land. He had taught me to fish in Cascade Creek, shown me where the springs bubbled up from the rocks, explained how the watershed worked. This was my home, my legacy. And some HOA president thought she could just take it from me. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I called James and told him to proceed with option 2. The paperwork took 3 weeks to prepare. James filed a formal notice with the county water commissioner, declaring my intention to exercise my exclusive water rights. Copies were sent to Riverside Estates, HOA, the county, and the state water board. Everything was proper, legal, and documented. The notice gave them 60 days to cease all unauthorized use of water from my sources. After that, I would be within my rights to physically restrict the flow. James explained that we probably would not get to that point. Once they understood I was serious, they would negotiate. He was wrong. The response came not from their attorney, but from Brenda Patterson herself. She showed up at my cabin on a Thursday afternoon, driving a white Lexus SUV that was completely inappropriate for mountain roads. I watched from the window as she struggled to navigate the dirt driveway, her face pinched with frustration. I met her on the porch before she could knock. Brenda Patterson was exactly what I had imagined. Mid-50s, blonde hair styled in that aggressive Karen cut, designer clothes that probably cost more than my truck, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. She clutched a folder to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Dalton, we need to discuss this ridiculous claim you have filed about water rights." "Mrs. Patterson, I was not aware we had an appointment." "I do not need an appointment. This is HOA business, and as a member of our community, you are required to cooperate." "I am not a member of your community, as I have explained. My property is not part of Riverside Estates." "That is not what our survey shows." She thrust the folder at me. "This is a copy of the legal boundary description. Your property is included." I did not take the folder. "Your survey is wrong. I have the deed, the title, and the original homestead claim. None of them show my property as part of your development." "Well, you need to withdraw this absurd water rights claim immediately. You are threatening the well-being of 200 families." "I am exercising my legal rights. Your HOA put a fraudulent lien on my property. I am defending myself." Her face flushed red. "There is nothing fraudulent about it. You owe us money and you will pay it or we will foreclose, and you absolutely cannot cut off our water." "There are laws against that sort of thing. It is terrorism." "Terrorism?" I almost laughed. "Mrs. Patterson, I am following state water law. I own senior water rights that predate your community by over a century. If you want access to that water, you need to negotiate with me." And step one of any negotiation would be removing the illegal lien from my property. "I will do no such thing. And if you try to touch our water supply, I will have you arrested. I know the sheriff personally. I know the county commissioners. You are nobody living up here in this shack, and you think you can threaten our entire community. I will bury you in legal fees." She was practically shouting now, her face the color of a tomato. I kept my voice calm. "I think you should leave now. If your HOA wants to discuss this matter, they can do so through my attorney. His contact information was on the notice you received. You have not heard the last of this." She spun on her designer heel and stalked back to her Lexus. The engine roared to life and she tore out of there, spewing gravel everywhere. I watched her go and then called James to let him know about the visit. He was not surprised. "She is going to escalate," he warned. "Be prepared for anything. Document everything. If she shows up again, record the conversation if you can." The next escalation came 3 days later. I woke up to find a county code enforcement officer at my door. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, and he looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Dalton, I am sorry to bother you, but we received a complaint about potential code violations on your property. I need to do an inspection." "What kind of violations?" He consulted his clipboard. "Unpermitted structures, potential environmental hazards, and illegal water diversion." I almost laughed at that last one. "Who filed the complaint?" "I am not at liberty to say, but I do need to inspect the property." I let him do his inspection, following him around as he took notes and photos. He checked the cabin, the small workshop I had built, the water system that fed from one of the springs. Everything was properly permitted. Grandpa had been meticulous about that. After an hour, the officer closed his clipboard and gave me an apologetic look. "Mr. Dalton, I am not going to lie to you. Everything here looks fine. Better than fine, actually. Your permits are in order, your septic system is properly maintained, and your water system is completely legal. Whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time. Let me guess. Riverside Estates HOA. He did not confirm it, but his expression said enough. I will file my report. You should not have any issues. After he left, I called James again. They are harassing me now. Code enforcement showed up this morning. Did you pass inspection? With flying colors. Good. Document it. Every time they pull something like this, it strengthens your case. They are acting in bad faith, and a judge will see that. The harassment continued. Over the next 2 weeks, I received visits from a fire inspector, a wildlife officer investigating a report of illegal hunting, and even a health department representative responding to a complaint about improper food handling. Each time, I cooperated fully, and each time, the inspector found nothing wrong. Each time, I documented everything. Meanwhile, the 60-day notice period was ticking down. James had been in contact with their attorney, but Morrison was not budging. They refused to acknowledge my water rights and refused to remove the lien. They seemed to think I was bluffing about cutting off the water. With 2 weeks left in the notice period, I decided to take a drive down to Riverside Estates. I wanted to see exactly what I was dealing with. I wanted to understand where the water lines ran and how the system was configured. The development was impressive in a sterile sort of way. Identical houses in 5 approved styles, each painted in approved colors. Every lawn was precisely maintained. Every mailbox was the same model. It looked like a movie set, not a real community. I drove slowly through the streets, noting the water infrastructure. There was a pump station near the creek where water was pulled into the community system. From there, it fed to a storage tank on the hill, which provided pressure to the entire development. It was a simple system, and it was completely dependent on the flow from Cascade Creek. I was so focused on the infrastructure that I almost did not notice the woman waving at me from a driveway. She was elderly, probably in her 70s, with white hair and a friendly smile. I stopped and she walked over to my truck. "Are you lost, dear? Can I help you find something?" "No, madam, just looking around. I am Marcus Dalton. I live up the mountain." Her expression changed, but not to hostility, to curiosity. "Oh, you are the one with the water rights. I heard about that. I am Dorothy Mitchell. My husband and I have lived here since the development opened. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Mitchell." She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned closer. "Can I speak frankly, Mr. Dalton? Most people here think Brenda Patterson is out of her mind. She runs this HOA like the Gestapo. The fees keep going up, the rules keep getting more ridiculous, and if you complain, she fines you or takes you to court. A lot of us are fed up." This was interesting. I am sorry to hear that. When we heard about the water rights situation, some of us thought, well, maybe someone is finally standing up to her. "Is it true you can shut off the water?" "Legally, yes. I own the senior water rights to the sources that feed your community. But Mrs. Mitchell, I do not want to hurt anyone. I just want them to stop harassing me and remove the illegal lien they put on my property." She nodded sympathetically. "Brenda does not back down. She does not know how. But between you and me, if you did shut off the water, it might be the wake-up call this community needs. Maybe people would finally vote her out and get someone reasonable in charge." We talked for a few more minutes, and she gave me her phone number, telling me to call if I needed anything. As I drove away, I realized that this situation was more complicated than I had thought. It was not just me against the HOA. It was the HOA leadership against their own residents, with me caught in the middle. The 60-day deadline arrived on a Monday in late May. I had heard nothing from Morrison or the HOA except for one final letter threatening legal action if I proceeded with my frivolous and illegal water claims. James had prepared all the necessary documentation. All I had to do was make the call. I stood at the spring that morning, watching the water bubble up from the rocks and flow downhill toward the creek. This spring had been here for thousands of years. My family had protected it for 5 generations, and now I was going to use it as a weapon. I did not feel good about it, but I did not see any other choice. I called James. Do it. He filed the paperwork with the county that afternoon. Effective immediately, I was exercising my right to exclusive use of the water from my springs and Cascade Creek. Any unauthorized diversion was now prohibited by law. Then we waited. The response was faster than I expected. By evening, my phone was ringing off the hook. I did not answer. Instead, I sat on my porch and watched the sunset, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, there was a crowd at the entrance to my property. Literally a crowd. 15 or 20 people, some holding signs, others just milling around. I could see news vans from 2 local stations. Brenda Patterson stood at the front, holding a megaphone. I called the sheriff's office. This is Marcus Dalton. I have trespassers on my property and I need assistance. Deputy Torres arrived within 20 minutes. I recognized him. We had gone to high school together. He took one look at the situation and shook his head. Marcus, what did you do? I exercised my legal water rights, Carlos. That is all. He walked down to the crowd and had a conversation with Brenda that I could not hear. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at my cabin, clearly agitated. Finally, Carlos came back up to where I stood. She says you are trying to kill people by cutting off their water. She wants you arrested. Carlos, you know that is ridiculous. I filed the proper legal paperwork. I am not breaking any laws. I know. I already told her that, but she is not leaving. She says this is a peaceful protest on county land. He looked back at the crowd. Technically, the entrance is on the county easement, so I cannot make them leave unless they are blocking access. Are they blocking your access? Not yet. Then my hands are tied. Sorry, man. If they actually trespass on your property or threaten you, call me back. The protest continued all day. By afternoon, the crowd had grown to maybe 40 people. More news crews showed up. I watched from the cabin as Brenda gave interview after interview, painting me as some kind of monster who was holding the community hostage. Around 4 o'clock, a reporter hiked up to my cabin. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and sharp eyes. She introduced herself as Jessica Chen from Denver News 9. Mr. Dalton, can I get your side of the story? Mrs. Patterson is saying some pretty serious things about you. I was tired of hiding. I agreed to talk to her. We sat on the porch and I explained everything. The fraudulent lien, the harassment, the code enforcement visits, the HOA's refusal to negotiate. I showed her the property documents, the deed, the water rights paperwork. I explained that I had given them 60 days' notice and multiple opportunities to resolve this peacefully. Jessica was a good reporter. She asked tough questions, but she was fair. When we finished, she asked if she could film some footage of the property and the water sources. I agreed. That night, her segment aired on the news. I watched it at Dorothy Mitchell's suggestion. She had texted me to say I should see it. Jessica had done an excellent job. She presented both sides but made it clear that the facts were on my side. She had even dug up information about the HOA's history of lawsuits and Brenda Patterson's reputation. The segment ended with a question. Is this a case of an HOA abusing its power or a property owner holding a community hostage? The legal battle continues. My phone rang a few minutes after the segment ended. It was James. Marcus, you did good. That interview was perfect. Measured, factual, sympathetic. And more importantly, you just made this a public interest story. The HOA is going to have a much harder time painting you as the villain now. Do you think they will negotiate now? I think we are about to find out. Morrison called me right after the segment aired. He wants to meet tomorrow. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at James's office. I arrived early and waited. James reviewed our position one more time. We are asking for 3 things. 1. Immediate removal of the lien. 2. A formal acknowledgement that your property is not part of the HOA. 3. A written agreement that they will not harass you further. In exchange, you will grant them a water access easement at a reasonable annual fee. How much is reasonable for 200 homes? I was thinking $10,000 a year. That is only $50 per household, completely reasonable for senior water rights. Richard Morrison arrived precisely at 10. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with an expensive suit and a leather briefcase. He did not shake hands or make small talk. He sat down and got straight to business. My client is willing to discuss a resolution, but we need to establish some ground rules. First, Mr. Dalton needs to restore water access immediately. Holding a community hostage is not a negotiating tactic we will reward. James did not miss a beat. Your client put a fraudulent lien on my client's property. If we are talking about hostage situations, they started it. The water access will be restored when we have a signed agreement. That is unacceptable. There are elderly people, children, people with medical conditions who need water. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you refused to negotiate for the past 2 months. We gave you 60 days notice. You laughed at us. You called my client's water rights irrelevant. Well, they are not irrelevant anymore, are they? Morrison's jaw tightened. What are your terms? James laid them out. Morrison listened without interrupting. When James finished, Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I need to discuss this with my client, but I can tell you right now, they are not going to agree to an annual fee. That sets a precedent they do not want to establish. Then they can drill their own well and establish their own water rights. Oh wait, they cannot, because the source is on my client's property and the rights are already claimed. Mr. Morrison, you have no leverage here. Your client screwed up. They built an entire development without securing water rights. That is not my client's problem. We will sue. We will argue that the water rights are subject to beneficial use requirements and that cutting off a community violates public welfare statutes. James smiled. Please do. My client is using the water for beneficial purposes. He lives here. He is not required to share his water with anyone. And public welfare arguments do not override property rights in Colorado. You know that. But if you want to spend your client's money on a losing lawsuit, be my guest. Every day that goes by, the residents of Riverside Estates are going to get more angry at the HOA for failing to secure their water supply. How long do you think Brenda Patterson stays in power when people cannot shower or flush their toilets? Morrison stood up. I will be in touch. After he left, James turned to me. That went well, did it? He did not agree to anything. He will. He is already doing the math in his head. They have no choice. They just need to find a way to save face. James was right. Morrison called back that afternoon. The HOA would agree to remove the lien and acknowledge that my property was not part of their community. They would also agree to cease all harassment. In exchange, I would grant them a water access easement for 25 years. No annual fee, James asked. Correct. But they want the easement locked in long term, so this cannot happen again. James muted the phone and looked at me. What do you think? I thought about it. I did not need their money. I just needed them to leave me alone. Counteroffer. I will give them the easement. No annual fee, but the term is 10 years, not 25. And if they ever try to claim my property as part of the HOA again, or if they harass me in any way, the easement is immediately void. James relayed the counteroffer. There was a long pause, then Morrison agreed. The paperwork took another week to finalize. When we met to sign the documents, Brenda Patterson was there, and she looked like she had been force-fed lemons. She did not say a word to me, just signed where Morrison indicated and then left immediately. Morrison handed me a check. "That is for your legal fees and costs, $15,000. My client wanted to ensure there were no hard feelings." I almost laughed at that. No hard feelings from the people who had tried to steal my property. But I took the check. I had earned it. With the easement signed, I opened the valve that controlled the spring flow. Water resumed its natural course down to Cascade Creek and into the Riverside Estates system. The crisis was over, or so I thought. 2 months later, I received a call from Dorothy Mitchell. She sounded excited. "Marcus, you need to come to the HOA meeting tonight. Please, just trust me." I did not want to go anywhere near that HOA, but something in her voice convinced me. I drove down to Riverside Estates that evening and found the community center packed. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. Dorothy waved me over to a seat she had saved. "What is going on?" I whispered. "Just watch." Brenda Patterson called the meeting to order, but before she could get through the agenda, a man stood up. I recognized him from the protest. He had been holding a sign that said, "Save our water." "Point of order," he called out. "I move that we add an agenda item, vote of no confidence in the current board." The room erupted. People were shouting, some in support, others in opposition. Brenda was hammering her gavel, demanding order. "That is not proper procedure," she yelled. "You cannot just add agenda items." "Actually, we can." Dorothy stood up, holding a copy of the HOA bylaws. Section 7, Paragraph 3. Any member can request an emergency vote with a second from another member. I second the motion. The room erupted again. Brenda looked panicked. "We need to table this until the next meeting when people have had time to review." "No," someone else shouted. "We vote now." It took 30 minutes to restore order and set up the vote. In the end, it was not even close. The residents voted overwhelmingly to remove Brenda Patterson and the entire board. They elected a new interim board on the spot, including Dorothy as president. Afterwards, Dorothy found me in the parking lot. "Thank you for coming. I wanted you to see that." "I did not do anything. You showed people that the board could be challenged. You showed us that we did not have to just accept whatever they said. That water situation was the final straw." When people found out the board had put the entire community at risk because they never bothered to secure water rights, they were furious. "You did us a favor, Marcus." I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. The Lien was gone. The harassment had stopped. And somehow, accidentally, I had helped an entire community stand up to a bully. 3 weeks later, I received an official letter from the new HOA board. It was an apology. A formal written apology for the illegal lien, the harassment, and the distress they had caused. They thanked me for working with them to resolve the water situation and assured me that I would never be bothered again. I put the letter in the file cabinet with all the other documents and went outside to work on the garden. Life was good. The mountains were peaceful. And my cabin, my grandfather's cabin, was safe. But then, one morning in early August, I woke to the sound of vehicles on my property, multiple vehicles. I looked out the window and saw 3 SUVs with county markings parked near my workshop. People were walking around, taking photos, consulting maps. I pulled on clothes and headed outside. A woman in a county jacket saw me approaching and walked over. "Mr. Dalton, I am Sandra Hayes with the County Planning Department. We are conducting a survey as part of a proposed expansion of the Riverside Estates development." My blood ran cold. Expansion? Yes, The developer has applied for permits to add another 100 homes to the community. Part of the proposed expansion area appears to include portions of your property, so we need to survey the boundaries and assess environmental impact. That is impossible. My property is not for sale, and it is not part of any development. She consulted her tablet. According to the application, the developer owns the land adjacent to yours, and the expansion will require an easement across the northern portion of your property for utility access. The easement was supposedly granted in 1985. That is not true. There is no easement on my property. My grandfather never granted any easement. Well, that is what we are here to verify. If you have documentation showing otherwise, we would love to see it. I spent the rest of the morning producing every document I had. The deed, the title report, the survey maps, everything. There was no easement. There had never been an easement. This was another attempt to grab my land. Sandra Hayes reviewed everything carefully. Mr. Dalton, based on what you have shown me, I do not see any record of an easement. I am going to flag this application for further review. The developer will need to provide proof of this easement or revise their plans. Who is the developer? She checked her tablet. Cascade Development LLC. The registered agent is Richard Morrison. Of course it was. The HOA's attorney was also a developer trying to expand Riverside Estates, and he needed my land to do it. The water rights situation had been just the opening act. This was the real play. I called James immediately. He was not surprised. I had a feeling that water easement was too easy. Morrison was playing the long game. He got you to agree to give them water rights, establishing a precedent of cooperation. Now he is trying to leverage that into claiming you have a history of granting easements. But I never granted an easement for utilities or anything else. I know. But he is banking on the fact that most people do not carefully read what they sign. Did you review every page of the water easement agreement? My stomach dropped. You reviewed it. I did, and there was nothing in there about utility easements, but let me pull the file and double-check. Sometimes lawyers slip language into addendums or exhibits. He called me back an hour later. We are clean. The agreement only covers water access, nothing else. Morrison cannot use it to claim an easement for his development. But Marcus, he is not going to stop. He wants your land, or at least access across it, and he is going to keep trying different angles. What do? We go on offense. We file a declaratory judgment action asking the court to confirm that there are no easements on your property and that any future claims of easement rights are barred. We make it so clear that you own your land free and clear that Morrison cannot try this again. How long will that take? A few months to get a hearing. But in the meantime, I will send Morrison a cease and desist letter making it clear that we know what he is trying to do. James drafted the letter that afternoon. It was a work of art, politely but firmly explaining that any attempt to claim easement rights over my property would be met with immediate legal action, including claims for abuse of process and harassment. He sent copies to Morrison, Cascade Development LLC, the County Planning Department, and the State Attorney General's Office for good measure. The County Planning Department put Morrison's development application on hold pending resolution of the easement issue. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I came home from a supply run to find that someone had cut the lock on my gate and driven onto my property. There were fresh tire tracks leading up to the springs. When I hiked up to investigate, I found survey stakes driven into the ground around the water sources. Someone had been marking my land. I called Deputy Torres. He came up and took photos of everything. "This is trespassing and vandalism," he said. "Do you have any idea who did it?" I have a pretty good idea, but I cannot prove it. Let me make some calls. Torres came back 2 days later with interesting news. The survey stakes matched equipment used by Mountain Survey Inc., a company that did all of Cascade Development's survey work. Morrison's fingerprints were all over this. I am going to have a conversation with Mr. Morrison, Torres said. Make it clear that trespassing on your property will not be tolerated. But before Torres could do that, something happened that changed everything. I received a call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Mr. Dalton, my name is Frank Morrison. I am Richard's father. I need to talk to you about my son." We agreed to meet at a diner in Cedar Ridge. Frank Morrison was in his 70s, a tall man with white hair and tired eyes. He looked nothing like the aggressive attorney who had been causing me so much trouble. "Mr. Dalton, I am going to be straight with you. My son is in over his head. He has been playing fast and loose with development deals, and it is finally catching up with him. The Riverside Estates expansion is supposed to be his big score, but he cannot make the numbers work without access across your property. He has investors breathing down his neck, and he is desperate." "That is not my problem, Mr. Morrison. I know. And I am not asking you to solve his problems. I am asking you to be careful. When Richard gets desperate, he does stupid things. I am worried he might do something that crosses a legal line, and I do not want to see my son go to prison." "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that you watch your back, document everything. Keep your lawyer close, and if Richard approaches you with any kind of deal, do not take it. There will be strings attached." I thanked him for the warning. As he stood to leave, he paused. "For what it is worth, you did the right thing with that water situation. The HOA had no business trying to claim your property. Richard told me about it. He thought it was a slam dunk and you made him look like a fool. He has not forgotten that." After Frank left, I sat in the diner for a long time, drinking coffee and thinking. This was not over. Morrison was not going to give up. And now I knew he was desperate, which made him dangerous. I called James and told him about the conversation. "We need to accelerate the declaratory judgment action. File it tomorrow." "Already done. I filed it this morning. The hearing is set for October 15th. September passed quietly, too quietly. I kept expecting Morrison to make another move, but nothing happened. The survey stakes remained where they were. No more county inspectors showed up. No more mysterious trespassers. It made me nervous. A week before the hearing, I received a certified letter from Morrison's law firm. Inside was a settlement offer. Morrison would pay me $250,000 for a utility easement across the northern 10 acres of my property. The easement would be limited to underground utilities only and would not affect my surface rights. It was a generous offer. More money than I would make in 2 years of software work. All I had to do was give up a small portion of land that I barely used. I called James and read him the offer. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to tell him to go to hell. That land is not for sale at any price. My grandfather protected this property for decades, and I am not going to be the one who carves it up for a development." Then we turn it down. "But Marcus, you need to understand that this offer shows his desperation. When we reject it, he is going to get more aggressive. Be prepared." I rejected the offer the next day. Morrison's response was immediate. He filed an emergency motion asking the court to delay our declaratory judgment hearing, claiming that new evidence had come to light regarding historical easements on the property. It was complete garbage, but it worked. The judge pushed our hearing back to January. Morrison had bought himself 3 more months. In October, the harassment started again. I received a notice from the IRS claiming I owed back taxes on unreported income from the water easement. It took weeks to sort out, and it was eventually dismissed as a clerical error, but it was clear someone had filed a false report. Then the county health department showed up again, this time claiming someone had reported me for running an illegal commercial operation out of my cabin. They wanted to inspect my computer equipment, claiming I needed a business license for my software work. I was working from home, as millions of people do. I did not need a business license, but I had to hire an attorney to draft a response and get the health department to back off. Each incident was small, but together they were exhausting. Morrison was using a thousand-cut strategy, hoping to wear me down until I accepted his easement offer just to make the pain stop. It almost worked. By November, I was tired. I was spending more time dealing with legal issues than actually living my life. I started to wonder if the fight was worth it. Then Dorothy Mitchell called me. "Marcus, I heard about what Morrison is doing to you. The new HOA board had a meeting last night and we want to help. We talked to an attorney, and we think the HOA might have legal standing to sue Morrison for fraud. He was our attorney when he put that lien on your property. He had a conflict of interest because he was also planning to develop land near yours. That is an ethics violation. Dorothy, I appreciate the offer, but I do not want to drag your community into this. You are not dragging us into anything. We are volunteering. Morrison screwed us over too. He represented the old board when they made that water mistake. He should have told them they needed to secure water rights before the development was built. He committed malpractice and we have grounds to sue. But more importantly, if we file a complaint with the State Bar Association, it will distract him from harassing you. I talked to James about it. He thought it was a brilliant strategy. Morrison cannot fight on two fronts. If he is dealing with a bar complaint and a malpractice suit from his former client, he will not have time or resources to focus on you. Dorothy and the HOA board filed their complaint in December. The State Bar Association opened an investigation. Morrison was forced to hire his own attorney to defend himself. The harassment stopped immediately. Our hearing finally arrived in mid-January. The courtroom was small, just the judge, James, Morrison, and me. Morrison looked exhausted. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. The hearing lasted less than an hour. James presented our documentation showing clear title to the property with no easements. Morrison tried to argue that historical access patterns created an implied easement, but the judge was not buying it. "Mr. Morrison, I have reviewed the evidence, and I see no basis for your claim. Mr. Dalton's property has been in his family for over a century, and there is no record of any easement ever being granted. The fact that a creek runs through the property and provides water to downstream properties does not create an automatic easement for utility lines. If your development needs access, you need to either negotiate with Mr. Dalton or find another route. Your Honor, the expansion cannot proceed without that easement. There is no other viable route. The topography is not my concern, Mr. Morrison. Property rights are my concern. Mr. Dalton owns his land free and clear, and he is under no obligation to provide you with an easement. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff." The judge signed the order on the spot. James handed me a copy as we left the courtroom. It was a complete victory. The court had officially declared that my property had no easements and that Morrison's claims were without merit. Morrison stopped me in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked defeated. "Congratulations, Mr. Dalton. You won." "I never wanted a fight, Morrison. I just wanted to be left alone." "I know. For what it is worth, I am sorry. My father was right. I got desperate and made bad decisions. The bar investigation is probably going to end my career. I just wanted you to know that none of this was personal." It felt pretty personal to me. He nodded and walked away. I never saw him again. The State Bar Association suspended Morrison's license 3 months later, pending a full ethics investigation. Cascade Development LLC filed for bankruptcy shortly after that. The Riverside Estates expansion was permanently canceled. Dorothy called to give me the news. "It is over, Marcus. Morrison is done. The development is dead. You can finally relax." She was right. Spring came to the mountains, and for the first time in a year, I was able to just enjoy it. I spent my days hiking, fishing, working on the cabin. Life returned to normal. In May, I received a letter from the new HOA board. They wanted to throw a community appreciation event and asked if I would attend as the guest of honor. I politely declined. I had no interest in being anyone's guest of honor. I just wanted my quiet life back. But Dorothy did not give up easily. She showed up at my cabin one Saturday morning with a basket of homemade cookies and a proposal. "Okay, you do not want to be guest of honor, I get it, but what if we did something different? What if we created a community conservation fund to protect the watershed? Your property protects the headwaters, but there are other parcels downstream that could use protection too. We could raise money, work with the land trust, create a buffer zone that benefits everyone." It was a good idea. A way to ensure that what happened with Morrison could never happen again. I agreed to participate. Over the next year, the Riverside Estates community raised over $500,000. They purchased 3 key parcels along Cascade Creek and donated them to the county land trust with permanent conservation easements. The watershed was protected forever. They asked me to speak at the dedication ceremony. This time I agreed. I stood in front of 200 people and talked about my grandfather, about the importance of protecting the land for future generations, about how communities are stronger when they work together instead of fighting each other. When I finished, Dorothy presented me with a plaque. It read, "In appreciation to Marcus Dalton for teaching us that standing up for what is right sometimes means standing alone, and that protecting the land we love is worth any fight." I hung that plaque in my cabin, right next to my grandfather's old photos. He would have been proud. 2 years after the water rights battle, I received a call from Frank Morrison. His son Richard had moved to Oregon and was working as a paralegal, trying to rebuild his life. Frank wanted to thank me for not pursuing additional legal action against Richard. "He made mistakes, but he is trying to make amends. Your decision to let it go meant everything." I had not really decided to let it go. I had just decided I was done fighting. There is a difference, but I did not explain that to Frank. Some lessons people need to learn on their own. Life in the mountains continued. I worked my remote software job, maintained the cabin, and watched the seasons change. Occasionally, I would see people from Riverside Estates hiking the trails near my property. They always waved. We were not friends exactly, but we were no longer enemies. We were neighbors, bound by a shared watershed and a shared history. One fall afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when an unfamiliar truck pulled up. A young woman got out, maybe 30 years old, with a surveying equipment case. My guard went up immediately. "Can I help you, Mr. Dalton?" "I am Rebecca Chen. I am a hydrologist with the State Water Board. I have been reviewing the water rights database and I came across your holding. I wanted to introduce myself and let you know that you have some of the most valuable water rights in the county." I am aware. I am sure you are. But what you might not be aware of is that the state is developing a new water conservation program. We are looking for holders of senior rights who would be willing to partner with us on watershed protection and water quality monitoring. There would be grant money available to support conservation efforts on your property. She explained the program. It was voluntary, non-invasive, and actually sounded beneficial. They would install some monitoring equipment on the springs, conduct quarterly testing, and in exchange, I would receive grants for any conservation work I wanted to do on the property. "Why me?" I asked. "Because your springs are the headwaters for this entire watershed. They are pristine, undeveloped, and you have clearly been a good steward of the land. We need more people like you involved in water protection." I agreed to participate in the program. Over the next year, they installed discrete monitoring stations that tracked water quality and flow rates. The data was made public, available to researchers and policymakers. My grandfather's springs became a model for what healthy headwaters should look like. The state grants allowed me to do erosion control work, plant native vegetation, and repair some of the old fencing that marked my property boundaries. The land had never looked better. 3 years after the HOA battle, on a cold December morning, I received a surprise visit. Deputy Torres pulled up with a young woman I did not recognize. "Marcus, this is Attorney General Investigator Lisa Park. She needs to talk to you about the Morrison case." We went inside, and Lisa explained that the state had uncovered evidence that Richard Morrison had been involved in a much larger fraud scheme. He had not just tried to grab my land. He had been systematically filing false easement claims on properties throughout the county, then using those false claims to secure development loans from banks. It was wire fraud, bank fraud, and real estate fraud all rolled into one. "We need your testimony, Mr. Dalton. You were one of the first people to challenge his claims, and your documentation is some of the strongest evidence we have. There are at least 15 other property owners who fell victim to his scheme. Some of them lost their land. We want to prosecute Morrison federally, and we need your help." I agreed to testify. The case took another year to build, but eventually Morrison was indicted on 23 counts of fraud. His trial was held in federal court in Denver. I testified for 2 hours, walking the jury through everything that had happened. The fraudulent HOA Lien, the water rights battle, the attempted easement grab, the harassment campaign. Other property owners testified to similar experiences. The evidence was overwhelming. Richard Morrison was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay restitution of over $3 million to his victims. Frank Morrison was in the courtroom for the sentencing. He looked 10 years older than when I had last seen him. As I was leaving, he approached me. "I am sorry for what my son did to you and to all these people. I raised him better than this." "I know you did, Frank. Sometimes people make their own choices." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and walked away. "That was 5 years ago. Richard Morrison is still in prison. Cascade Development LLC is long defunct. Brenda Patterson moved away shortly after being voted out of the HOA. Dorothy Mitchell served 3 terms as HOA president before retiring. The new leadership transformed Riverside Estates from a dictatorial nightmare into an actual community. I am still in my cabin, still working my software job, still protecting the watershed. The springs still bubble up from the rocks the way they have for thousands of years. The water still flows down to Cascade Creek and into the valley below. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on the porch and think about everything that happened. The battle over water rights, the fight to protect my grandfather's land, the accidental role I played in exposing a fraud scheme and reforming an abusive HOA. I never wanted any of it. I just wanted to be left alone, but my grandfather used to say that sometimes the best thing you can do is stand your ground, not because you want to fight, but because some things are worth protecting. Land, water, legacy, the right to live peacefully on property you own. I protected all of those things, and in doing so, I helped protect them for everyone else in the watershed, too. Last month, the county unveiled a new hiking trail that runs along Cascade Creek. There is an interpretive sign at the trailhead explaining the importance of watershed protection and thanking the Dalton family for over a century of stewardship. My grandfather's name is on that sign, right next to mine. I stood there reading it, remembering the old man who taught me to fish, who showed me where the springs bubbled up, who instilled in me the importance of protecting the land. He fought his own battles in his time, and I fought mine in mine. Someday, someone else in my family will inherit this property, and they will fight their own battles to protect it. That is the way it should be. The land endures, the water flows, and the people who love them stand guard generation after generation. The HOA tried to take my cabin. They forgot I held the water rights. That was their mistake. But it was also their opportunity to learn something important. You cannot build a community on stolen ground. You cannot thrive by taking what is not yours. Real communities are built on respect, on cooperation, on understanding that we all share the same watershed and the same responsibilities. Riverside Estates learned that lesson the hard way, but they learned it. And now, 5 years later, we actually have a good relationship. They protect the water below. I protect the water above, and everyone benefits. I still get asked sometimes if I regret how everything went down, if I wish I had just paid the fake lien and avoided all the conflict. The answer is always no. You do not build a good life by surrendering to bullies. You build it by standing firm on solid ground and protecting what matters. My grandfather knew that. Now I know it too. And the land, the water, and the legacy are all still here, still protected, still flowing down the mountain the way they have for over a century. Some fights are worth having. This was one of them.